Well, as several have so kindly pointed out, it's been so long since I've been here. I can't remember where we were. Don't worry about it, Greg. I'm over it. It's whatever you said. I've forgotten, and several others. But and Janet. I mean, Janet is used to be this kind, nice, pleasant person, and I don't know what's happened to her. I mean, it's. Yeah, right. It was the way you said it. You know, there's a tone you can put with things that kind of spins in a different circle. So, but we're going to return back to Hebrews chapter 11 for a brief moment tonight. And I will warn you, I think I may be back next Wednesday night. But see that little finger right there? If I come back, it'll be straight, or at least straighter. And if I don't come back, I'm not sure. Maybe it'll just be gone. I'm not sure what she's going to do. But they're in lieu of surgery, they're going to put needles in and try to pry it loose and do some stuff like that, which sounds a lot better to me than surgery. So anyway, anybody remember what the book of Hebrews has been about? Hang on. That's a pretty good description. Hang on. And why would we need to hang on?
Lots of darts being thrown our way.
All right, lots of darts are being thrown our way, and lots of discouragement come our way, and lots of weariness comes our way, and we are a people who really have a strong tendency to get discouraged. Everybody identify with that? And we get discouraged, and we one of the biggest things about discouragement is we like to give up. And you've heard me say many, many times that I think Paul is writing, for example, the book of 1st and 2nd Timothy to Timothy, because I personally think Timothy's really discouraged. And I think you just get into the very first words of 1 Timothy, verse 3 of chapter 1, and Paul is saying, I'm urging you to stay here in Ephesus. And it sounds to me like Timothy's wanting to take off. And have we not all been there in situations where we just wanted to take off and be done? And these people have been taking off, and they've been trying to leave. They've been trying to go back to their old ways. And Paul's been arguing all the way through. You ought to stick with it, stay the course, hang on. And now all of a sudden he starts talking in chapter 11 about the subject of faith. And to my discredit, or to my error, I have never, ever looked at chapter 11 in the context of the book of Hebrews. Now, I've taken a lot of lessons out of Hebrews chapter 11, but I've never looked at it from the viewpoint of what's happening. But most of the illustrations, maybe not the first one tonight, but most of the illustrations in Hebrews chapter 11 are stories of people who had every reason to want to just quit and give up. For example, we'll get to Noah in a little bit, maybe even tonight. And tell me what you know about Noah before we ever look at the passage.
He wasn't a very good preacher.
He wasn't a very good preacher. I'm not totally sure about that, but I guess he did preach and nobody responded. Is that what you're? Yeah. Okay.
It seemed like he took a lot of ridicule and jabbing about building the ark.
All right, probably took. Yeah. Was he largely by himself? Had some loyal family members, but largely by himself. And he did try to talk to people, and people wouldn't listen. And he's probably has an effort here that's probably not an easy effort. I mean, he's building a very large boat. Anybody remember how long it takes? That's the part of the story that always kind of makes me pause and really think about it.
120 years.
All right, Greg says 120 years. Something like 100 years, okay? 100 years that I'm building on this thing that I don't understand even why I'm building, because we haven't seen rain and we haven't certainly seen flood. And why am I building something that looks like this? And I don't even know what it's really for. I mean, I'm hearing a story from God that says, I'm going to destroy this world by way of a flood, and you and your family can be saved. And And yet for 100 years or so, he builds and builds and builds and works and works and works, and he gets ridiculed, and he tries to tell people what's coming, and they won't listen. And would you stick with it? That's the problem. Would you stick with it? And I have quit over less on a lot of things, okay? But that's not where we start. Let's start in verse 5. Because in verse 5, we start with a mystery man. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life. Now, I just get a quick look. We don't know very much about Enoch. I know he lived 365 years before he was taken. I know it says in Genesis chapter 5, he walked with God. I know he had a son named Methuselah, an old rascal, okay? And he had a lot of other sons and daughters. But he just walking with God, and God took him. And I know from Jude, verse 14, that he was a person who, along the way, walking with God, did preach against the evil that was going on in the land in his day, much like Noah would have preached about the evil going on in the land in his day. But God just took him. 365 years, God took him. Now, the only thing I can conclude from that at this moment in time is faith must really impress God. Do you think that could be true? Faith must really impress God. And we have tried to talk about that subject of faith for at least 4 or 5 years here. And we've tried to say that it's a secret to joy. It's a secret to peace in this life. It's a secret to hope in this life. When everything is cratering, this trust in God, this overwhelming trust in God, is a secret to living a really quality life. And I have been also guilty of saying, and I don't mind the guilt on this one, that I have heard throughout my life a lot about obedience. I haven't heard all that much about trust. And I haven't been taught how to trust. And so I've been on a journey for these last several years. It started here in a summer class that I was teaching on Sunday mornings. Started here for me trying to figure out how I could learn to trust. And it's, for me at least, been a journey that has at times aggravated me because I've faltered. But for the most part, it's been really, really healthy for me. It's been really healthy for me when I'm at my wit's end to stop and think about trust. And what God wants long before he wants me to try to obey him, he wants me to trust him enough to obey him. And he must really like this thing of trust, because here's a fella that he just was so impressed with, he just took him. He only did that one other time that we know of. With a person he was so impressed with, he just took him. And so he follows this thing from Enoch by saying, yes, he was commended because of his faith. And in verse 6 he says, and it's kind of like I want to remind you, he says, without faith, it is what? Impossible to please God. Now, you may grow really tired of me saying this, but I want you to hear again. If you are obeying God, if you're trying to keep commandments for a commandment's sake, if you're trying to keep commandments just because you've been told to keep commandments and they're not preceded by trust, it is impossible to please God. So Sunday, Susan and I slipped off from church here. Terry wouldn't know that because she's in Florida playing. But we slipped off from church here and we went to the Corn Cafe to eat. There were no places left except for this big table, so we sat with some other people. So a lady sat down by Sue's, and she works at a place in Weatherford much like the Judah House is here. only it's sponsored by some German religious people. And they're doing a really good work of helping people through all this. But she began to tell Suze about one sect of religion, just based on her 24 years of working there. One sect of religion, and said, the interesting thing about them is they are so very strict on how they live and what they wear and what they do. But she said, my perception is they don't do it because of loyalty to God. They do it because it's tradition and because they've always done it that way. And I had this sinking feeling when she was saying that, because I think a lot more people other than just the ones she was talking about have been guilty through the years of doing it just because they've been told to do it and told to do it and told to do it. And it was tradition, and it's what Dad did, and it's what Grandpa did, and they never learned this other part, because it's the trust that allows us to have a relationship with God, so that when things get really, really tough, I can say, I believe it'll work out, because it is a substance of things hoped for. It's a conviction of things I can't see, that even means when I can't figure out why it's not working, I'm convinced that God can take care of it. And so Enoch got to be taken away. Amazing, amazing story we know little about. And right on the heels of that story, he says, and let me tell you something else. Unless you have faith like that, without this kind of faith, it's impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. Now there's the order. Everybody see the order now? Because faith is my conviction that God is so real, he's right here beside me. In fact, my conviction he's so real, he lives inside of me through his Spirit. And my conviction is he rewards those who diligently seek him. So obedience is going to be out there somewhere, and living right's going to be out there somewhere, and not falling into temptation or trying not to fall into temptation is going to be out there somewhere. But it's always preceded by this absolute belief, confidence, trust that God is, and that God takes care of those who believe that he is. Does that make sense, everybody? It's just so important that we get that. And now immediately he gets to this story of Noah. By faith, Noah. He was warned about things not yet seen. Now, I got to tell you, there is a whole lot of Thomas the Apostle inside of me. There is a whole lot of Thomas inside of me. Tell me what the story of Thomas was like. What does Thomas want to know when he hears that Jesus has been raised from the dead? All right, why do we call him doubting?
Because he said he wouldn't believe till he saw it.
So you come along and you tell me, hey, he's alive. He's standing over somewhere, and he said, now wait a minute. You expect me to believe that? I tell you what, you bring him to me and let me see those nail prints, and then you got me. So Jesus comes along and says, hey, Thomas, come here. Put your finger right here. Now do you believe? But before you get too carried away, this is the guy who just a little bit earlier heard Jesus say, we're going to go over there where Lazarus is, and where we're going to, and Thomas is saying, "Whoa, wow, they're after you there, Jesus. They're going to kill you." And Thomas says, "But we'll go. I don't care if we lose our life. We'll go." This guy is not a weakling. He's a soldier. He's a fighter. But now you get him to a point where he's saying, "Wait a minute. You know, this one is a little hard to reach in my belief system. So I got to have some proof." Well, Noah is being warned of things he's never seen. And you've got to capture that in your mind as a great big deal, don't you? Never heard of something like a flood or big rain like this, and never heard this thing that the tallest mountain peak's going to cover with water. I never heard anything like that. And what kind of boat am I going to build, and what am I going to put in this boat, and how long is it going to last? And nobody else believes that wild story around here, I can tell you that. And 100 years of trying to find something called gopher wood and put it together and make it shaped right and make it just exactly so long and so high and so what 100 years of something I've not yet seen. And how does a person do that? How does a person continue? This says one way. You believe that God exists, and you believe that He rewards those who diligently seek Him. You exist by faith. And so this guy, Noah, just keeps building and keeps building until one day he looks up and says, "Sons, this thing's done." And God says, "No, it is done. Get in there and close the door." And can you imagine what he begins to hear? I mean, he's inside there with the door closed. Can you imagine the sounds? I mean, I don't want it to be like be in the midst, literally in the heart of a tornado, in some kind of vessel you couldn't be heard in, but bouncing around, and the noise, the rain, the battering. And then what would it be like when you finally feel that ark move upward just a little bit? It's being lifted. You think, what's happening now? You know. And then you're bounced around like a little cork all around for all those days. I mean, this is an amazing story. This guy Noah is an amazing man. But he's amazing only for one reason. He stuck with it. And he stuck with it for only one reason. Because he believed God. And he believed that he would be rewarded if he stuck with God. And guess what? One day, after the winds have blown a long time, and the ark kind of settles down, and he figures out he can open that door, and he opens that door, and it's out on dry land again, and it all worked. Isn't that something? And that's really what we have to live like. That's really what life's supposed to be like for us, is that we believe, or we trust, to the point that we just live this life as hard as it gets, as ugly as it gets sometimes, as aggravated as I get sometimes. And I do get aggravated. I mean, there are a lot of things. And so we just keep hanging on. And I'll guarantee you there are things in every one of your lives tonight that you wish you could change. I guarantee you there's something in your life that it's too hard, too much. You've been praying about it, still hasn't happened. And what we're called to be is just like this. We hang on, we pray, and we just keep going.